Hello, enjoy your viewing.
I woke up early as I always did on my birthdays, hoping that this year would be different, that this year, just for once, my children would remember me. Maybe they'd surprise me. Maybe they'd bring joy into the quiet house I've lived in for so long. Maybe this year, the absence would be filled, and for once, I'd be the center of their world again. It was my 75th birthday. A milestone, I thought, something worth celebrating, something that meant my years weren't in vain. The years I spent sacrificing for them. The years I'd poured into their lives, only to watch them drift away. But on this day I thought maybe they'd show up. Maybe they'd realize that despite the years and the loneliness, I was still their mother, still their matriarch. I prepared the house as if nothing had changed. I set the table carefully, the way I always had. My finest china with the delicate blue flowers, the one my mother handed down to me. I placed the napkins just right, and I even set out my old silver tea set, the one I hadn't used in years. It was a ritual, something I could still control in a world where everything else felt beyond my reach. I baked a lemon cake, the same recipe I had used for decades. The smell of it, warm and fresh, filled the house. I could almost hear the laughter of the children around the table, the clinking of silverware, the gentle hum of conversation that used to fill these rooms. I even put on my best dress, a little floral number I'd kept for special occasions. After all, I deserved to look nice, didn't I? Maybe they'd notice. Maybe they'd care. The clock ticked on, and as the hours passed, the excitement I had clung to began to fade into quiet resignation. By noon, I had already reheated the food twice, trying to make it look as fresh as when I first set it out. Still, there was no knock at the door. No phone call. No message. Nothing. Just the ticking of the clock, growing louder in my ears, the empty space around me becoming more unbearable. I didn't cry. Not yet. I didn't want to. I wanted to believe that maybe they'd be late, maybe something had come up. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down I felt it. The truth. They weren't coming. By the time the sun was setting, I was starting to lose hope. I sat there alone, the candles on the table flickering out, their light fading like the joy I once felt for this family. I stared at the empty chairs across from me. My hands trembled as I reached for my fork, trying to eat, but it all tasted like ash in my mouth. The food that had once meant comfort, the cake that had once been a symbol of love, now felt hollow. And as I pushed the plate away, I realized something that stung more than anything. I was invisible to them. Then, as I sat there, feeling as if I had been forgotten in the very place I built with love, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. Could it be? Could it finally be them? My hands shook as I got up to answer, pretending I wasn't holding my breath, pretending I didn't expect the world to crash down on me. I opened the door to find a delivery man standing there with a large package in his hands. His smile was apologetic as he handed it over to me. "Delivery for Mrs. Margaret Parker," he said. I was confused for a moment, expecting someone from my family. "Is this for me?" I asked, staring at the package. "Must be a mix-up. I'll check the address, ma'am." He fumbled with his paperwork, his eyes darting over the address on the package. "Yes, it's for you," he confirmed. "Sorry about the confusion. Enjoy the delivery." And with that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the doorway, the weight of the package heavier than any gift could ever be. I walked back to the kitchen, unsure what I expected. Maybe a surprise. Maybe something special, something that would finally make me feel loved again. But when I opened it, the scent of something familiar, a package that seemed too official, too cold for a birthday gift, hit me first. Inside the box was food. A small meal, complete with 3 servings, each labeled carefully with names. But it wasn't the food that stopped me. It wasn't the meal that shattered me. It was the envelope that lay beneath it. A formal letter, the kind I had never imagined would be addressed to me. I read it slowly, my heart racing as I took in the words. It wasn't a birthday card or a surprise note. It wasn't a gesture of love or kindness. No, it was the confirmation of my worst fear. My son, my own flesh and blood, had already planned my future without consulting me. He had decided, without so much as a word, to send me away to a retirement home. The packet, neatly arranged with my personal details, my medications, my medical history, my bank account information, made it clear. My son had planned this. He had already signed the papers, sent them off without a thought for how I might feel, or what I might want. I sat there, the packet in my hands, as the realization hit me hard. My children had made a decision without me, as if I was nothing more than an object, something to be moved out of the way when it was no longer convenient. They didn't ask. They didn't care. The silence in the house was deafening. I stared at the papers in my hands, stunned. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for an explanation. I just sat there, feeling the weight of the years I had spent giving everything for them, only to be discarded without a second thought. But as the last candle flickered out, something inside me shifted. I wasn't done yet. I wasn't ready to be erased. And I would make sure no one ever treated me like I didn't matter again. That night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, turning over the papers in my hands, I realized something deep inside me had shifted. The weight of betrayal was like a stone pressing down on my chest. But it wasn't just the betrayal that burned. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be overlooked for too long. I had spent years waiting for them to remember me, waiting for someone, anyone, to see me as more than just a name on a piece of paper. That night I finally knew no more. I was no longer the woman who waited and watched as her life passed by, as her children lived their own lives, leaving her behind. I wasn't the passive, invisible mother who let her fate be decided by others. The anger that had built up inside me finally overflowed, and there was no room left for doubt. I had to act. I had to take control of my life, or my son would continue to make decisions for me without my consent. When morning came, I felt like a woman reborn. The cold, hard edge of determination was with me now. The papers were waiting on my desk, and I was ready to start making changes. I didn't waste time second-guessing myself. When Lucia, my lawyer, called to tell me that we could proceed with revoking all the documents they had used to manipulate me, I knew this was my chance. Not just to win back my home, but to end their silent control over my life. They had thought I was weak. They thought they could push me out quietly, as if I didn't matter. But they were wrong. I moved swiftly, feeling a new sense of power as I sorted through documents, preparing to transfer ownership of everything I had worked for into a trust. The house, the bank accounts, everything would be safe under my control. For the first time in years, I was making decisions that were mine to make. No more pretending that I was okay with being sidelined. No more pretending that their words didn't sting. As the days passed, the actions I had taken began to show results. I received confirmation from the bank that the access my son once had to my accounts had been removed. The power he thought he held over me was gone. It wasn't just about the money, it was about my dignity, my rights, my ability to decide where I would live and how I would spend my final years. And for the first time, I felt the weight of my choices lift off my shoulders. I wasn't just some forgotten mother anymore. I was the woman who stood up and took back her life. When Lucia came over a few days later to finalize the paperwork, she couldn't hide the surprise in her eyes. She had known me for years, and she had seen me at my lowest. But now she saw something different, something she had never seen before. A woman in control, a woman with purpose. As I signed the papers that transferred ownership of my house and assets into the trust, it felt like the final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. The heaviness that had once threatened to swallow me now seemed far away. But as I walked back to my front door, feeling the weight of the past lift, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen and saw my son's name. My stomach tightened. Was this it? Was this the moment when everything changed? I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hello. Mama, we need to talk." His voice was strained, different from the usual confident tone I had grown used to. For the first time I heard uncertainty in his words. A little panic, maybe even regret. I stayed silent for a moment, then said coldly, "What's there to talk about, Douglas? You've made your decision already, haven't you?" There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But he didn't. Instead, he stammered, Mama, we didn't mean for it to happen like this. We were just trying to. We thought it was for the best. We thought it would be better for you. For everyone. I felt a surge of heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice calm, icy even. No more excuses, Douglas. Just tell me. Why did you think you could make this decision without asking me? Without even speaking to me about it? He was quiet, and in the silence, I could hear the weight of his actions bearing down on him. Finally he muttered, "We thought you'd forget, Mama. We thought it would be easier this way. For everyone. Rachel thought you'd be better off." I cut him off, my voice hard and steady. "I didn't forget, Douglas. But you certainly forgot about me, didn't you? You and Rachel both. You didn't think I would fight back. You thought you could make a plan, and I would just accept it." His voice cracked, and for the first time in a long while, I heard genuine fear. "Mama, please. We were just..." I didn't let him finish. "I'm not your problem anymore. You don't get to decide for me anymore. Don't come here again. Don't bother with your explanations. I've made my own plans, and I will see this through." Hung up the phone. The silence in the house was deafening, but I didn't feel alone anymore. I didn't feel small. I felt stronger than I had in years. That was the moment I knew everything had changed. When you stop accepting manipulation, everything shifts. Can happen in an instant just like that. There was no longer any space for doubt. I wasn't the woman who sat around waiting anymore. I had finally understood. Nothing could break me now. The moment I gathered all my documents and headed to Lucia's office to finalize everything I knew, I was holding the threads of this drama in my hands. I wasn't a passive character in the background anymore. My children thought they could control me, manipulate me, but they were wrong. They hadn't seen me for what I truly was, but I had seen them clearly now. They had underestimated me for the last time. The more I stood my ground, the clearer my path became. I was done being the one who waited, the one who tried to make them understand. I wasn't begging anymore, and I wasn't apologizing. They had buried me in their own version of the truth, believing that once I was alone and weak, they could discard me like a forgotten piece of furniture. I had thought that maybe they loved me, but I had been blind. They had long since moved on. I was just a problem to solve in their minds, not a mother to cherish, not a person to respect. When Lucia advised me to take legal action, it was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For years, I had carried the burden of pretending everything was fine. Pretending they cared. Pretending they wanted what was best for me. But the truth was finally clear to me. They didn't care. They never had. And that was a bitter pill to swallow. But it also gave me the clarity I needed to move forward. I had made the first major step. The trust was set in place, the documents were filed, and the power had shifted. I had taken full control. I wasn't going to just let them walk over me anymore. It was time to reclaim my life, my home, and my dignity. The biggest change, however, was yet to come. I packed up my papers, gathered everything I needed, and drove myself to the bank. I had never been one to trust easily, but I had to do this. I had to make sure my assets were legally protected. With Lucia by my side, I signed the necessary documents, officially cutting off all access they had to my money. I couldn't risk them pulling the same tricks they had pulled before, not after everything I had worked for. When I left the bank, the weight in my chest was lighter. The fear that had plagued me for months, the terror that I had no control over my future, had faded. I was no longer living in someone else's world. I was living in my own, and I was determined to keep it that way. Every small victory since that day made me feel more like myself again. I began noticing the little things around the house. The old rocking chair where I used to sit with my children when they were young, the well-worn kitchen counter where I had prepared countless meals. These things weren't just items. They were memories, pieces of me that had been overshadowed by years of neglect. I had spent too many years looking at these things as if they were tied to the past, but now they were part of the present. They were part of who I had become, and no one, not even my own children, could take them from me. I started waking up every morning with a sense of purpose, not dread. I brewed my own tea, made my own breakfast, and took the time to savor the small joys that had once been swallowed by the chaos of my family's expectations. I had always done things for them, always been there for them, but now it was my turn to take care of myself. I wasn't going to wait for someone to care for me anymore. I was the one who had to care for myself, and that realization felt freeing in ways I hadn't imagined. And then, one day, when I returned home after taking care of the final details, I saw that I had missed a call. It was from my son. I hadn't expected it, but somehow I wasn't surprised either. His voice, when he left the voicemail, sounded different. The confidence, the disregard had vanished. There was a touch of panic in his tone, something I hadn't heard in years. He wanted to talk. I knew this moment would come. I knew they would try again to twist the story, to make me feel guilty, to make me believe that I was the one who had done something wrong. But I wasn't ready to fall for that anymore. Not after everything I had done to take control of my life. The next morning I sat in my favorite chair, the same place where I had waited so many times in the past, and I dialed his number. He picked up almost immediately, but this time he didn't sound sure of himself. "Mama, can we talk?" His words were careful, tentative. I didn't waste any time. "What's there to talk about, Douglas? You've already made your decision, haven't you?" There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But he didn't. He cleared his throat, trying to gather his thoughts. "Look, Mama, we didn't mean for it to happen this way. We were just trying to make things easier for you." "No," I said, my voice cold and clear. "You weren't making things easier. You were making them easier for yourselves. You never even asked me what I wanted." He hesitated, his voice faltering. I thought you'd be better off." "Better off?" I interrupted. "Better off being forgotten. Better off being sent away without even a conversation." "No, Douglas. You don't get to decide that for me." Another pause, heavier this time, as if the weight of my words was sinking in. "I'm not your problem anymore," I added, my heart steady, my resolve unshaken. "Don't come here again. I'm not interested in hearing your excuses." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had taken back control. I had finally faced the truth, and it wasn't the painful truth that I had always feared. It was the truth that set me free. It wasn't just a victory over them. It was a victory over the fear I had lived with for so long. And for the first time I felt ready to move on, ready to face whatever came next on my terms. When I had finished everything I needed to do, I didn't expect peace. It was as if I could feel the invisible chains that my children had wrapped around me slowly loosening, and I was finally free. There would be no more moments of helplessness or despair. I felt confident in my decision. No longer was I just a woman waiting to be remembered. I was a woman who could stand tall and take her fate into her own hands. But when the phone rang again, I knew this call would be different. It would be the moment of truth. When I saw my son's name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. I didn't jump to answer. I paused, taking in a breath, fully aware that this moment would define everything from here on out. The power in my hands was clear now. No one could take it from me. After what felt like an eternity, I picked up the phone. His voice, when it came through, was softer than I expected, laced with a touch of panic. He started as he always did, with apologies, with justifications, trying to explain how hard it had been for him to make the decisions he had. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the woman who had patiently listened to his excuses and waited for him to make things right. "Mama, I understand that you're upset, but I was just trying to help." He began, his words faltering. Cut him off. My voice was calm, but every word felt like a hammer driving into the truth. "Help," I said, holding steady, each word striking like a nail. "If you think that taking me out of my home, removing me from everything I've built, is help, then I don't want it. You decided that I was no longer needed, and that's the worst part of all of this." His silence hung in the air, heavy and loaded with something I couldn't describe. It was no longer about my hurt. It was about facing the truth. He hadn't been trying to help me. He had been trying to control me, to make decisions for me that he had no right to make. "I've understood you, son," I said, my tone sharp and final. "But now you'll understand me. Don't call me again. I've made my decision. This is my house, and these are my terms." Hung up the phone. My hands, once trembling, were steady now. I didn't need to beg for answers anymore. I didn't need to wait for his permission or his explanation. I had drawn my line in the sand. There would be no more manipulation, no more hidden decisions made behind my back. My life was mine, and I would stand firm in that. The quiet in the house was deafening, but it felt different now. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The silence wasn't filled with longing or the hope of a change that would never come. It was filled with something new, the power to make my own choices. As I looked around the room, I realized something deep in my soul. I was no longer part of their plan. No longer a forgotten woman sitting in the corner of their lives. I had become the woman who had reclaimed her place in this world, the woman who had the right to choose for herself. And that realization was the greatest freedom I had ever known. When I made that final call, when I spoke those last words to my son, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. My soul stretching its wings, ready to fly. It wasn't anger that I felt, but peace. It was the kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting against the inevitable and simply accept the truth. I was free. I was whole. And it was no longer about what they thought of me. It was about what I thought of myself. The woman I was before I became invisible to them. The woman who would never again allow herself to be erased. I wasn't the broken woman they tried to make me into. I was Margaret Parker, and I was standing on my own 2 feet for the first time in years. A few days had passed since that final call with my son. In those days, I found myself settling into the silence in my home. Silence that had once terrified me, now felt like a comforting companion. I had spent so much of my life waiting for my children to remember me, waiting for someone to finally realize my worth. But no more. The constant ache in my heart, the one that came with the knowledge that I was invisible to them, had quieted. No longer did I feel as though I was just a passing figure in their lives. I was done waiting. I was no longer waiting for things to return to how they were, because I had accepted that they never would. And that was all right. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the light of the late afternoon sun filtering through the curtains, casting a warm golden glow on everything in my life that still mattered. The house, though aging, was mine. It had seen me through my highest highs and my lowest lows. But now, the house felt like a sanctuary, not just a place I lived in, but a place that reflected the strength I had found inside myself. There was no more trembling at the thought of them, no more trembling at the thought of being abandoned or forgotten. I had made peace with it all. I had taken back control. My decisions were mine alone. I wasn't going to wait for permission or approval from anyone anymore. I knew what I wanted, and I was going to make it happen. It wasn't just about my house or my money. It was about reclaiming my life. For years I had lived in their shadow, in their expectations, allowing them to define who I was. I had allowed myself to be a secondary character in my own story. But now I was taking the lead. I wasn't their pawn anymore, not their afterthought. I was Margaret Parker, and no one, not even my own children, was going to decide my future for me. One evening, as I wandered through the garden, I felt something deep shift inside me. The garden was always my refuge. It was the one place where I had felt at peace for as long as I could remember. The flowers that bloomed, the way the sun set over the garden, the cool breeze on my face. It all reminded me of who I was, of the life I had built for myself. With each step I took between the rows of flowers and shrubs, I felt my resolve growing stronger. No more justifications. No more apologies. No more quietly waiting for someone to notice me, to value me. My life, this life I had lived for so long, was now entirely mine. There was a power in that knowledge. I walked through the garden with my head held high, each step reaffirming my decision. They had thought I was weak, that I would let them make their decisions for me, that I would continue to let them erase me from my own story. But they were wrong. I had chosen this path, and I was determined to walk it with purpose. They might still believe I was the same woman who had quietly accepted their disregard, but they would learn otherwise. Every single decision I had made in the past few days, every document I signed, every call I made, was a declaration of my independence. And the next step was just as clear as the first. It was time to make this official. I went inside, the cool night air still lingering on my skin, and sat down at the old desk I had inherited from my mother. I took a deep breath, steadying my hands before picking up the phone. It was time to call Lucia. My lawyer, my old friend, had always been there for me. I had trusted her with my secrets, with the things I couldn't say to anyone else. And now, I needed her help to ensure that I would never again be manipulated or controlled by my own children. I dialed the number, the anticipation in my chest mounting with each ring. When she finally picked up, I could hear the surprise in her voice. She hadn't expected me to call so soon. "Lucia, I want to file an official claim," I said, my voice unwavering, though a slight tremor of excitement ran through me. "I'm not letting them control my life anymore. I want to make sure that everything is in order, that no one can take anything from me, that no one can decide my future without me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her thinking it over, processing what I had just said. Finally she spoke. "Are you sure, Margaret? This is going to be a big step." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice strong. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." When Lucia confirmed that we could move forward, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. My heart, which had been heavy for so long, suddenly felt lighter. I was no longer a passive observer in this drama. I was an active participant in my own fight. For the first time in years I felt alive. Truly alive. I wasn't just waiting for something to happen, I was making it happen. The very next day, as if the universe was aligned with my decision, I received a call from Ava, my granddaughter, the one person who had always known me, who had never forgotten me. Her voice, when it came through the receiver, was gentle, but I could hear the concern beneath it. "Grandma, I know what happened. I heard them talking. Understand now. What they did to you. It was wrong and I want to be with you. I won't stay silent anymore." Her words hit me like a thunderclap, rattling something deep within me. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the determination. Ava had always been quiet, observant, but she had never been one to stand by when something wasn't right. And now I knew she was on my side. We were no longer alone in this. Together we could make a difference. Together we would change things. "Thank you, my dear," I said, my voice steady but thick with emotion. "I won't go down without a fight. And now I know who truly has my back." This was the beginning of something new. Not only did I have confidence, but now I had Ava's support. Genuine support. She wasn't just offering help. She was standing beside me, ready to take action, to fight alongside me. And that meant more than words could ever express. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us fighting for what was right. From that moment on, I knew that nothing could stop me. I had taken control of my life, and with Ava by my side, I was unstoppable. This wasn't just about defeating my children or winning a legal battle. It was about overcoming all the years I had spent doubting myself, all the moments I had let fear dictate my actions. Now I stood on the brink of something monumental. Not just a victory over my family, but a victory over my own insecurities. A victory over the version of myself that had been held down for so long. This was my time. And I wasn't going to leave it for anyone else. Just a few days after I made my final decision, Lucia and I completed all the legal work. I handed over all my affairs into safe hands, and each document, each signature, was like a symbol of my fight for dignity. I was no longer the woman who was forgotten or hidden away. I had become a woman who had the right to control her fate, her story, her true self. My battle had not only been with my children, who decided I was just a burden to them, but with my own doubts. How long had it been since I stopped being myself? How long had I allowed others to decide what would happen to me? Time had passed, and I had remained in the same house that had long since become a battleground. But now, it was no longer just a room where I waited for my fate. It was my home. And I was once again its mistress. Thanks to Lucia, I had revoked all the access my son had to my accounts. I had cancelled the power of attorney I had signed years ago due to a misguided surgery. Now I controlled all my finances. Now it was my life, my right to choose. But the greatest victory was yet to come. My children had not reached out to me, and their silence was even worse than their words. I no longer felt the pain of their ignoring me. Now I could calmly watch their scheming, knowing that all their plans would come to nothing. But there was a new hope on the horizon. Ava, my granddaughter, had become my support. She was no longer the little girl who silently watched as my children and I fought our battles. She had become the one person who showed me true humanity, and behind her, I felt a support I hadn't felt in many years. Ava had become the person who reminded me that there was still space for real love in my family. She brought me peace when I was on the verge of despair. She reminded me that there were still people who didn't see me as a burden but as someone who still had dignity. It was clear now. My son's plan had failed. Everything he tried to do, everything he had planned, was in vain. Even if he came to me with tears, saying he understood and made a mistake, I felt that nothing could be undone. My hands were no longer in his control. That day, when he came to me with apologies, I felt only one emotion. It wasn't pain and it wasn't resentment. I wasn't angry. I simply no longer needed his recognition. I was no longer his mother who waited to be acknowledged. I was a woman who had done everything for herself. When I told him I didn't want him to come back again, I didn't feel triumphant. Felt peace. I was no longer the one who could be controlled, manipulated, or forgotten. I was strong. The days passed, and one day, Ava appeared again at my doorstep. She was holding a bouquet of flowers, slightly dusted with the spring morning's dew, and she looked different from the last time I saw her. She had grown into someone independent, and in her eyes, I saw the determination that had been missing from her parents and her mother. And I knew, this time, her support wouldn't just be empty words. It would be a true expression of love, the kind I hadn't felt from the rest of the family in years. We sat together, brewing tea, talking about the future, about how we would stay together, no matter what circumstances might come. We spoke about the importance of having your own truth, even if it didn't align with what others wanted to hear. And in that moment, I understood something profound. The most important thing in life isn't how many years you've lived, but how you've lived them. And I would no longer let anyone take away my right to choose, my dignity, and my truth. The sun set as I stood on my porch, looking at the new flowers that Ava and I had planted together. It was my new beginning. My journey was just starting. And in that moment I felt I would never fear again.
Thanks for watching. Bye bye.